She sat quietly in the ceremony hall, wearing a simple blue dress among all the military uniforms. The Admiral didn't recognize her face, but when he called her name, every Navy SEAL in the room stood up and cheered. For 25 years, she had been their guardian, angel. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also, like and subscribe for more stories. The ceremony hall was filled with the sound of chairs scraping against polished floors and the quiet murmur of conversations. Admiral Richardson stood at the podium, his chest heavy with medals that told stories of decades spent in service. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the familiar faces of Navy SEALs, officers, and distinguished guests who had gathered for the annual Navy Special Operations Awards ceremony. But there was one face in the crowd that didn't belong to the usual circle of warriors and commanders. She sat quietly in the third row, her hands folded in her lap, wearing a simple blue dress that seemed out of place among all the military uniforms. Her graying hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes held a warmth that contrasted with the formal atmosphere of the room. Admiral Richardson noticed her but couldn't place her. He made a mental note to ask his aide later who she was and why she had been invited to such an exclusive gathering. What the Admiral didn't know was that every SEAL in that room not only knew who she was, but owed her more than they could ever repay. Maria Santos had never planned to work at a military hospital. She had studied nursing because she wanted to help people, and when the job opening came up at the Naval Medical Center, it seemed like any other nursing position. She was young then, barely 25, with dreams of maybe working in pediatrics or helping elderly patients in a quiet clinic. But life had different plans for Maria. Her first day at the trauma unit changed everything. The doors burst open and a team of medics rushed in carrying a young man on a stretcher. He was barely conscious, his face pale and covered in dirt and blood. The medics were shouting medical terms she was still learning. But one thing was clear. This soldier was fighting for his life. "He's a SEAL," one of the doctors told her quickly as they worked. "Special operations. They see things most people never will. When they come back hurt, they need someone who understands." Maria didn't understand then. Not really. But as she helped clean his wounds and checked his vital signs throughout the night, she saw something in the young man's eyes when he briefly woke up. It wasn't just physical pain. It was something deeper. Something that made her heart ache. His name was Danny Morrison, and he was her first SEAL patient. He wouldn't be her last. Over the months that followed, Maria learned that the trauma unit at the Naval Medical Center was where Navy SEALs came when missions went wrong. They arrived broken in ways that went far beyond what she could see on x-rays or bandaged with gauze. Danny stayed in the hospital for 6 weeks. His leg had been badly injured in an explosion during a mission he couldn't talk about. During those long weeks of recovery, Maria was there for every shift change, every nightmare that woke him up screaming, every moment when the pain medication wore off and reality came flooding back. "Why do you do this job?" Danny asked her one evening when the pain was particularly bad. "I mean, really, you could work anywhere. Why here with guys like us?" Maria was changing his bandages, being as gentle as she could. "Because guys like you need someone to take care of you," she said simply. "And because I think what you do matters." Danny was quiet for a long time. "Most people don't understand what we do." "I don't need to understand it to know it's important," Maria replied. "I just need to understand that you're human beings who deserve to be taken care of when you're hurt." That conversation changed something in Danny, and it changed something in Maria too. She realized she wasn't just treating injuries. She was helping heal the invisible wounds that came from a life of service and sacrifice. In the tight-knit SEAL community, word travels fast. Danny went back to his team and told them about the nurse who stayed late to talk when nightmares kept him awake. About the woman who never asked questions about classified missions but somehow always knew when someone needed an extra blanket, a cold drink, or just someone to sit quietly in the room. Soon, more SEALs started asking for Maria when they came to the hospital. Not just asking, specifically requesting her by name. The hospital administrators noticed and tried to spread her patients among other nurses, but the requests kept coming. "She gets it," was what the SEALs would tell each other. "She doesn't try to fix everything with words. She just takes care of you." Maria developed a reputation for being the nurse who would stay past her shift if someone needed her. The one who remembered that Jake Williams couldn't sleep without white noise, so she always brought a small radio. The one who knew that Tom Chen needed to call his mother every Sunday, or he would sink into depression. The one who figured out that Rick Torres responded better to treatment when she talked to him about baseball instead of his injuries. She learned their names, their stories, their fears. She celebrated their victories and mourned their losses. She became part of a community she had never expected to join. Not all of Maria's patients made it home. Some arrived too late, too hurt, fighting battles that medicine couldn't win. Those were the hardest days when she had to call families and tell them their son, their husband, their father wouldn't be coming home. But even in those dark moments, Maria found ways to make a difference. She learned to help families say goodbye. She arranged video calls when possible, held phones so dying men could hear their children's voices one last time, and stayed with those who had no family to call. Marcus Smith was one of the hardest cases she ever handled. He was only 23 when he arrived at the hospital, his body broken from an improvised explosive device. His team had carried him for miles through enemy territory to get him to safety, but the damage was too severe. Marcus lived for 3 days after arriving at the hospital. Maria was there for all of them. She held his hand when the pain was too much, listened when he wanted to talk about his hometown in Ohio, and promised him that his team members who were still deployed would know how brave he had been until the very end. On the night Marcus died, Maria sat with him so he wouldn't be alone. She had done this before and she would do it again. It was part of the job she had never expected, but had grown to understand was perhaps the most important part. As years passed, Maria became more than just a nurse to the SEAL community. She became a lifeline, a constant in their world of uncertainty and danger. When SEALs came back from deployments, many would stop by the hospital just to check on her, to let her know they were okay. She kept pictures on her desk, photos that patients had sent her from weddings, graduations, children's birthday parties. Each picture told a story of life continuing after trauma, of healing that went beyond what happened in hospital rooms. Danny Morrison, her first SEAL patient, visited her every year on the anniversary of his injury. He had retired from active duty after several more missions and now worked training new SEALs. He always brought his wife and eventually his children to meet the nurse who saved Daddy. "You didn't save me," Maria would always correct him with a smile. "You saved yourself. I just made sure you had a good place to heal." But Danny knew better. He knew that Maria had seen him at his lowest point and had never stopped believing he could get better. That kind of faith, he learned, was its own form of healing. What most people didn't realize was that Maria's influence extended far beyond the hospital walls. She had created an invisible network of support that connected SEALs across different teams, different time periods, different stages of their careers. When a young SEAL named David Park arrived at the hospital feeling lost and questioning whether he was cut out for the job, Maria introduced him to Jake Williams, who had felt the same way 5 years earlier. When Sarah Martinez became one of the first female SEALs to be treated at the facility, Maria connected her with other female service members who understood the unique challenges she faced. Maria kept track of birthdays, anniversaries of difficult days, and important milestones. She sent cards, made phone calls, and somehow always seemed to know when someone needed to hear from a friendly voice. The SEALs started calling her Mama Santos, though never to her face. They knew she would probably roll her eyes and insist she was just doing her job. But to them, she was family. She was home base, the person they could count on to be there when everything else in their world was uncertain. Caring so deeply for so many people came with its own cost. Maria saw too much pain, held too many hands of dying young men, comforted too many families who would never be whole again. There were nights when she went home to her small apartment and cried for hours, overwhelmed by the weight of other people's suffering. She went to therapy, something she hadn't expected when she first became a nurse. She learned that caregivers needed care too, that there was no shame in feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of holding space for so much trauma and loss. But she never considered leaving. Even on the hardest days when another young SEAL didn't make it home or when she had to watch someone struggle with injuries that would change their life forever, she couldn't imagine doing anything else. "Why do you stay?" her therapist asked during one particularly difficult session. Maria was quiet for a long time. "Because they need someone who sees them as more than just patients," she finally said. "They need someone who remembers their names, who knows their stories, who believes they can heal even when they don't believe it themselves." Over the years, Maria received various hospital awards and commendations. She was recognized as Nurse of the Year multiple times, received letters of appreciation from grateful families, and was featured in the hospital newsletter for her dedicated service. But the recognition that meant the most came from her patients themselves. It came in the form of letters sent from deployed SEALs, photos of weddings and babies, phone calls on difficult anniversaries, and visits from teams who wanted to introduce their new members to the best nurse in the Navy. When the hospital tried to promote Maria to supervisor roles that would take her away from direct patient care, she always declined. She didn't want to manage schedules and budgets. She wanted to be there when the next helicopter arrived with someone who needed her, which brought her to this day, sitting in the third row of the Naval Special Operations Awards ceremony, feeling out of place among all the uniforms and medals. She had been invited by someone, she wasn't even sure who, and had almost decided not to come. But Danny Morrison had called her the week before and insisted she attend. "You need to be there, Mama Santos," he had said, using the nickname she pretended not to know about. "Trust me on this one." So here she was, watching Admiral Richardson prepare to begin the ceremony, feeling like she didn't belong among all these military heroes and decorated officers. Admiral Richardson began reading from his prepared remarks, acknowledging various achievements and presenting awards for valor, leadership, and distinguished service. Maria listened politely, proud of the young men and women being honored, many of whom she recognized from their time as her patients. As the ceremony continued, Admiral Richardson paused and looked down at his notes with a slight frown. This wasn't part of his prepared remarks, but his aide had insisted it be included. "Before we conclude today's ceremony," the Admiral said, "I'm told there's one more recognition that needs to be made. I'll be honest, this is unusual. The person being honored today is not a member of the military. She has never carried a weapon in combat or led troops into battle." Maria felt her stomach drop. She had a sudden, terrible suspicion about what was happening. "But I'm told by the men and women in this room that she is one of the most important people in the SEAL community. Someone who has served with distinction for over 2 decades, who has saved lives in ways that don't show up in medical records or mission reports." The Admiral looked out at the crowd, his eyes eventually settling on Maria, though he still didn't know who she was. "Would Maria Santos please come forward?" The room erupted. Every SEAL in attendance, active duty, retired, and reservists, stood and began applauding. The sound was thunderous, echoing off the walls of the ceremony hall. Maria sat frozen in her seat, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. Danny Morrison appeared at her side, gently helping her to her feet. "Come on, Mama Santos," he said softly. "It's your turn." As Maria walked toward the podium, she saw faces throughout the crowd, faces she recognized, faces she had cared for during their darkest hours. Jake Williams was there, now a team leader, giving her a thumbs up. Tom Chen caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Sarah Martinez was in the front row, tears streaming down her face. Some of the faces belonged to families, wives, parents, children of SEALs she had treated. They were there because someone they loved had come home, had healed, had found the strength to keep going, partly because of a nurse who cared enough to remember their name. Admiral Richardson looked genuinely moved as he realized what was happening. This small, unassuming woman in a blue dress commanded more respect from his elite warriors than most generals and admirals. "Mrs. Santos," he said as she reached the podium, "I'll admit I didn't know your name when this ceremony began. But every SEAL in this room not only knows your name, they consider you family." Maria's hands were shaking. She had never been comfortable with attention, had never sought recognition for her work. But looking out at all these faces, these people she had cared for and worried about and celebrated with, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Admiral Richardson held up a medal Maria had never seen before. It wasn't a military decoration, she wasn't eligible for those. Instead, it was a special recognition created specifically for her by the SEAL community, approved by Navy leadership for this unique occasion. For 25 years of exceptional service to the Navy SEAL community, the Admiral read from a citation that had been prepared by her former patients, for providing not just medical care but comfort, hope, and healing to warriors in their darkest hours, for remembering names when others saw only injuries, for staying late when others went home, for caring deeply when others maintained professional distance. He paused, his voice growing thicker with emotion. for being the person our heroes could count on when they needed someone most, for service above and beyond anything that could be asked or expected, for being, in the truest sense, a guardian angel to those who guard our nation. As the Admiral placed the medal around Maria's neck, the applause began again. But this time it was different. It was quieter, more reverent. It was the sound of deep respect and gratitude from people who knew what it meant to serve others. When the applause died down, Admiral Richardson handed Maria the microphone. She had never spoken to a crowd this large, had never been the center of attention like this. For a moment she wasn't sure what to say. "I don't know if I deserve this," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I was just doing my job." Someone in the crowd, it sounded like Danny, called out, "That's not true and you know it." Maria smiled through her tears. "Okay, maybe it was more than just a job, but I want you all to know that you gave me more than I ever gave you. You trusted me with your pain, your fears, your hopes for getting better. You let me be part of your recovery, part of your stories." She paused, looking out at faces that had become so familiar over the years. "You taught me what real courage looks like. Not just the courage to face enemies in combat, but the courage to heal, to ask for help, to keep going when everything seems hopeless. The courage to trust someone else with your vulnerability." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I've been honored to be your nurse, but more than that, I've been honored to be your friend. To watch you grow, to see you overcome things that would break other people, to celebrate when you found your way back to the light. As long as there are Navy SEALs who need someone to take care of them," Maria continued, "I'll be there. As long as there are young men and women coming back from places they can't talk about, carrying burdens they shouldn't have to carry alone, I'll be there to help them heal." She looked directly at Admiral Richardson. "Sir, I know you didn't know my name when this ceremony started, but I hope you'll remember it now. And I hope you'll remember that healing is about more than medical procedures. Sometimes it's about someone caring enough to stay late, to listen, to remember that the person in the hospital bed is someone's son or daughter, someone with dreams and fears and people who love them." The Admiral nodded, visibly moved. "Mrs. Santos, I can promise you that your name will not be forgotten, and neither will the example you've set for what it means to serve others." As the ceremony concluded and people began to move around the room, Maria found herself surrounded by current and former patients, their families, and colleagues who had worked with her over the years. There were hugs, tears, shared memories, and promises to stay in touch. Danny Morrison, now in his 50s with gray at his temples, pulled her aside. "You know why we did this, right?" he asked. "Because you wanted to embarrass me in front of a bunch of important people," Maria replied with a smile. "Because we wanted to make sure people know," Danny said seriously. "We wanted to make sure that somewhere in the official record it says that Maria Santos served, that she made a difference, that she saved lives in ways that can't be measured in medical charts." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "And because we wanted to say thank you while we still could. Thank you for seeing us as human beings instead of just cases. Thank you for caring when it would have been easier not to. Thank you for being there." That evening, Maria sat in her small apartment, the medal resting on her kitchen table. It felt strange to be recognized for something that had never felt like extraordinary service to her. She had simply done what felt right, what felt necessary. But as she thought about the ceremony, about all the faces in that crowd, she realized that maybe that was the point. Maybe extraordinary service didn't feel extraordinary to the person doing it. Maybe it just felt like the right thing to do. Her phone rang. It was Jake Williams calling from overseas where he was deployed. "Hey, Mama Santos," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I heard about today. Wish I could have been there." "How did you already hear about it?" Maria asked, laughing. "News travels fast in our community," Jake replied. "I just wanted you to know that even though I couldn't be there, you've been taking care of my team in spirit for years. Every time one of us gets hurt, every time we're scared or overwhelmed, we remember what you taught us about healing, about not giving up, about letting people help us." After they hung up, Maria realized that this was her real legacy, not the medal or the ceremony, but the way she had touched lives, the way she had helped people heal not just physically but emotionally, the way she had shown warriors that accepting care and vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was part of being human. The next morning, Maria returned to work as she had every day for 25 years. There was a new patient in room 203, a young SEAL who had been injured in a training accident. His name was Alex Rodriguez, and he was scared, far from home. and trying to be tougher than he felt. Maria introduced herself and began the familiar routine of checking vitals, adjusting medications, and assessing his needs. But she also did what she had always done. She looked him in the eyes and saw not just a patient, but a person. "First time in a military hospital?" she asked gently. Alex nodded, trying to look tough but not quite managing it. "It's scary," Maria said matter-of-factly. "Being hurt, being away from home, not knowing what comes next. That's normal, and it's okay to be scared." Something in Alex's face relaxed slightly. "The other guys on my team, they said if I ever ended up here, I should ask for you specifically. They said you were different." Maria smiled as she continued her work. "Different how?" "They said you actually care. Like really care. Not just professionally, but personally." "Well," Maria said, adjusting his pillow and making sure he was comfortable. "They were right about that. I do care. And I'm going to take very good care of you while you're here." As she worked, Maria thought about the ceremony the day before, about the medal now sitting in her apartment, about all the recognition and gratitude that had been expressed. It had been overwhelming and wonderful, but this was what really mattered. This moment, this young man who needed someone to care about his healing, to remember his name, to help him find his strength again. Admiral Richardson might not have known her name at the beginning of that ceremony, but every SEAL in the room did. And more importantly, every SEAL who would walk through the doors of this hospital in the years to come would learn it too. Because Maria Santos would be there, ready to heal not just bodies but spirits, ready to remember names and stories and the human beings behind the uniforms, ready to serve in the way she had always served, with her whole heart, one patient at a time. The medal was nice, the recognition was meaningful, but this was her real reward, knowing that she could make a difference in someone's life when they needed it most. And as long as there were warriors who needed healing, she would be there to provide it. That was her promise, her mission, her calling, and it was more than enough.